My name is Theo. I'm a calm man who prefers his own company. I'm a novelist, and my job necessitates extended periods of seclusion, which suits me perfectly. Writing brings me serenity and helps me understand the world. Social gatherings, not really my thing. The hubbub and small conversation, pretending to be interested in discussion. I don't care. It drains me. So I forego them whenever possible. But there was one thing that used to be more important to me than my work, my marriage. Take note that I stated used to. My wife Lucy and I have been married for a long time, but, to be honest, we stopped being a real relationship long ago. We did not fight, at least not often, but we also didn't speak. We just lived under the same roof. Somewhere on the way, the love we once had became lost in the space between us. My wife, Lucy, is not like me, outgoing, ambitious, and often in the middle of everything. She works in a fast-paced business, and her consulting position always appeared to require her more than I did. Late evenings at work were her usual. Endless meetings and business excursions that lasted longer than required. At first, I wonder why so late. Can't you finish your work at the office earlier? When will we have time together? But the answer was consistently the same. I eventually stopped asking. I got tired of hearing excuses, and simply accepted the truth. She didn't have time for me, because she refused to make time for me. I immersed myself in my own world, writing, reading, and relishing the seclusion that my job required. It was easier that way. Then one evening, she mentioned the company party. She didn't simply invite me. She demanded that I come. They said that would be excellent for me. A chance to meet some of the brightest brains in her industry. A networking opportunity. I wasn't interested in shaking hands with corporate folks, or pretending to be concerned about their business strategies. I wasn't looking to broaden my network, but something about the way she pushed it made me pause. She wasn't simply implying it. She virtually demanded it. And for the first time in a long time, she appeared to be putting in an effort. Maybe this was her attempt to mend things, to draw me into her world the way I had always urged her to. A part of me still believed we could save our marriage. I held on to that concept. So, after some back and forth, I gave in. I informed her I was going. I wasn't happy about it. But if there was even the slightest chance that this may be the first step toward repairing our relationship, I was willing to put up with a few hours of fake smiles and polite chat. At the time, I had no idea that accepting that invitation would be the first step toward the end of everything. We arrived at the venue looking like the ideal pair. Lucy had gone all out in a beautiful, form-fitting outfit that turned heads the moment we walked in. I made an effort to put on a tailored suit, despite the fact that I couldn't care less about creating an impression. The celebration was exactly what you'd expect from a high-profile corporate function. Grand, stylish, and packed with well-dressed professionals. It was the type of affair where people discuss stocks, mergers, and business strategy over sips of pricey wine. Lucy wasted no time presenting me to her coworkers, whose emotions were nearly identical, followed by polite inquiry. "So you are Theo? We've heard so much about you, and it's wonderful to finally meet you in person." I nod, shake hands, and exchange some niceties. My presence was clearly a novelty. I was a strange husband whom they had only heard about in passing. The man who never showed up for company meetings. Some of them tried to explore, asking about my work, books, and opinions on things they guessed I'd be interested in. Surprisingly, I found myself more engaged than I expected. This night might be worthwhile. The evening had gone unexpectedly smoothly. I wouldn't say I was having fun, but I had gotten used to the atmosphere. The talks were passable, the drinks were adequate, and for the first time in a long time, Lucy appeared to acknowledge my existence in her world. I wasn't stupid enough to imagine that this night would suddenly repair the fissures in our marriage. But for a brief time, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps, just maybe, this was a step in the right direction. Everything was going great. Lucy would occasionally glance at me, presumably happy that I was making an effort. Until the music changed. The lights dimmed somewhat, and the dance floor began to fill with couples. I wasn't paying attention until I saw a man approach us. He did not acknowledge me. He walked directly up to Lucy. "Shall we?" he inquired, his voice smooth and confident, extending out his palm as if he already knew the answer. For a split second, I waited for Lucy to shake her head, perhaps laugh it off, and remain where she was. I expected her to shoo him away and tell him she was here with her husband, but instead she smiled. She was going to accept. Instinct took control. I placed a tight palm on her wrist, preventing her from taking a step. My voice was low and controlled. "You aren't going anywhere, Wilson, the man." I later discovered that my presence had finally been acknowledged. He tilted his head slightly to look at me. He said nothing at first. I held my ground. "If you want to dance with my wife, do it properly or not at all. This should have been the end of it." But it wasn't. Lucy turned to me, her visage twisted with irritation and hatred. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she snapped, wrenching her arm free of my clutches. "You are making me feel embarrassed." I gazed at her, stunned by what she had just done. She returned to Wilson, brushing past me, as if I were nothing more than an impediment in her path. She was about to depart with him right in front of me, without guilt or hesitation. I felt a snap inside me. "If you move an inch, I shall be obliged to end our marriage." That was when Wilson finally responded. He turned fully to face me, looked me in the eyes, and spoke quietly and deliberately. He said, "You've always been a weakling, and you refuse to do anything." Then, without losing eye contact, he reached for Lucy's hand, tugged her along, and she followed right away. I felt the weight of humiliation crushing down on me, but I refused to satisfy them with a reaction. I wouldn't be the idiot that made a scene at a party full of her coworkers. Instead, I turned around and left alone. When Lucy eventually arrived home that night, I was still awake. I heard the front door open, and her heels click on the hardwood floor. That night, I had already decided on a number of issues, but sleep refused to come. A few minutes later, she stood in the doorway, arms crossed. I anticipated her to make a lame justification, or at least a simple explanation, for her conduct at the party. Instead, she launched into an angry rant. I let her speak uninterrupted. "You embarrassed me," she said sharply, her eyes flaming with hatred. "You created a scene for no reason and then simply departed. You left me at my own work party." I stood there quietly, absorbing every word she said. She was the victim, while I was the one who ruined everything. As I listened, it was evident that Lucy no longer respected me. Not as her husband, and especially not as a guy. A marriage formed without mutual respect is like a home built on weak ground, destined to collapse. I knew debating with her at that time would be fruitless. She had already determined that she was correct, and no amount of debate would change your mind. Instead, her harsh remarks reaffirmed what I had already known. Lucy's actions, and her refusal to accept responsibility, had sealed our fate. However, before I could properly address the flaws in our relationship, I needed to solve another subject. Wilson. I was not the type of man who sought out conflict, but I did not tolerate significant boundary transgressions. Wilson had crossed a line by brazenly approaching Lucy at the party, evidently feeling that I was too weak to intervene. Overconfidence was his first and most serious mistake. I decided then that I would not let anyone disrespect me, and that I would take the appropriate steps to hold him responsible for his actions. The following morning, Lucy scarcely notices my presence. No greetings, no small talk. Only a cold, empty silence. She moves around the home like I don't exist, slamming drawers harder than normal. She sighed significantly, indicating that she is still punishing me for the party. I do not react. I've already left whatever twisted game she's playing. My thoughts are on something else. By midday, I had made my move. I hired a private investigator. My instructions are simple. I want everything on Wilson, everyone's nasty little secret. Every skeleton in his closet, including where he lives and who he speaks with, where he spends the nights. If there is anything to be found, I want it in my hands. The investigator does not ask any questions. He simply nods and gets to work. Days pass, and Lucy maintains her silent treatment. But I don't care. I hardly notice. I'm waiting for the results, which arrived weeks later. Wilson is married with 2 children and a wife who, based on the images, appears blissfully unaware of the filth she is married to. But that is not all. Wilson carries a reputation. There are recordings of women at his workplace complaining about unwanted advances. Some settled softly. Some rejected a pattern of behavior hidden under paperwork and corporate apathy. However, the real dagger is the evidence of his affairs. Photo after photo, video after video documented his extracurricular activities, as well as his long history of unethical workplace behavior. Different women, different locales, including my wife Lucy. The photographs and videos contain timestamps. He met these girls in a variety of settings, including hotels, lounges, and even some late-night meetups in quiet parking lots. Seeing that my wife was having an affair with him crushed my heart, but I do not let it dominate me. I suspected it, but I now have proof. Wilson doesn't realize it yet, but he's finished. The initial strike has to be personal. His wife deserved to know who she married. I put together a package that included a USB flash drive containing photographs and videos of Wilson in areas where a married guy had no business being. He was careless, and I had receipts to prove it. I accompanied it with a handwritten message. "You deserve better." It was delivered right at her doorstep. I hired a delivery person to drop it off. I waited a few days, allowing the fire to grow throughout their home, and giving her time to comprehend the betrayal. Perhaps she challenged him, or packed his belongings and went. There is no way to know, but I honestly don't care. It was their battle to fight. But I wasn't done. Wilson had to lose more than his marriage. His work came next. I began sending anonymous accusations to his company's HR department, documenting his history of workplace harassment, his habit of sleeping with coworkers, and how he exploited his position to coerce women into silence. One email would not be sufficient. No corporation responds to a single complaint, so I exaggerated it. I set up many email addresses, each with a different version of the proof. Each sounded like a concerned employee who was tired of the terrible environment Wilson had created. The pressure worked. The corporation had no choice but to investigate. The whispers evolved into official meetings. Wilson was being monitored, questioned, and probed. After a month, the verdict was finally issued. He got fired. And Lucy. She did not escape unscathed either. The employer suspended her, and the other ladies involved in the workplace romance. Perhaps they were still contemplating what to do with them. Or they were telling her to reconsider her options. Regardless, the harm was done. Lucy walked through the door on the day Wilson was dismissed, looking exhausted. I already understood why Wilson was dismissed. And she has been suspended. My inside contacts had given me every detail about the emails, the investigation, and the ultimate conclusion. She hadn't said anything to me about it, but I could see it in her expression. I kept sitting and watched her from across the room. Having a bad day? I asked. Keeping my voice calm, she sneered and gave me a fatigued look. You have no idea. I leaned forward slightly. I might have an idea. Wilson is gone, isn't he? And you're suspended. She tensed for a second before forcing a laugh. Oh, God. Here we are again. She shook her head and headed toward the kitchen, as if she hadn't heard what I said. I did not let her escape. How long did you sleep with him, Lucy? That stopped her in her tracks. She turned around and laughed again, this time with a worried edge. Are you really still on this? My God. Theo, you are obsessed. You've been uneasy and resentful ever since the party. I simply stared at her. She crossed her arms. All I did was dance with the man, and you converted it into a complete fantasy in your brain. She gave me a sorrowful expression. I felt like a paranoid fool making stuff up. You overreacted that night. And now look at you, acting like a detective in a lousy crime drama. I did not argue. I did not yell. I simply removed the folder from my drawer and placed it on the table in front of her photographs. Lucy's face lost its color for the first time. She had nothing to say. Then came the switch. The tears and the shaky voice. Theo, why would you do this? Her eyes glistened as she approached, her voice pouring with desperation. You've ruined everything. My job is my life. Was this your goal? To destroy me? I let her rant. I let her blame me for exposing her and uncovering what she thought was safely buried. The divorce paperwork will be ready shortly. I replied plainly. If you have a problem with that, go to court. I turned and walked away, leaving her alone, drowning in the aftermath of her own decisions. Now that everything is said and done, I'd want to leave you with some lessons from my experience. Some of you might agree with me, while others would not. But these are the lessons I gleaned from this experience. First, disrespect is the first step toward treachery. Lucy followed Wilson onto the dance floor. Our marriage had already ended. It was not about the dance. It was about what that moment meant. A wife who respects her husband would not hesitate to reject another man, especially in front of him. The fact that she thought about it, let alone followed through, told me all I needed to know. Second, people reveal who they are. Believe them. Lucy had been acting aloof for quite some time prior to that night. Those late nights, the excuses. She always appeared too busy for us. These were not coincidences. These were signs. I ignored the signs because I wanted to think that things could still work. However, when someone repeatedly tells you that you are not a priority, it is because you are not. I should have accepted it sooner. But, at the very least, I did not flee when the truth became apparent. Third, retribution is best served cold. That night at the party, I felt humiliated. I felt powerless. Wilson stared me in the eyes and described me as a weakling. I briefly believed him. However, emotions lead to sloppy behavior. And I wasn't going to let my rage drive me into something dangerous. I waited. I collected information. I made certain that every move I made carried weight. In the end, patience transformed that single moment of humiliation into absolute destruction. Wilson lost his job. His marriage is likely dangling by a thread. And Lucy? Well, she received precisely what she deserved. Finally, any time spent resolving issues is never wasted. Some could argue that I wasted too much attention on this, and should have simply walked away. Maybe they are right. However, when you are blatantly insulted and someone makes it apparent that they have no regard for you, Regaining your power is more than just necessary. It's the only option. I refuse to be the man who allows himself to be walked over, and I don't regret any of it. Now I'll leave it to you. What are your thoughts? Was I right to act the way I did, or should I have handled it differently? Let me know. Here's the next story. I'm not sure what hit me initially. The fragrance of rain from the open window, or the oppressive weight in my chest that had been building up for weeks. I was sitting in my car, 3 homes down from my own driveway, peering at the pale light from my bedroom window. The curtains were drawn, but I knew Emily was inside and not alone. I didn't need to see it to know that this was no longer a suspicion. It was not paranoia. It was a fact. I'd spent the last 3 weeks gathering proof. I was not proud of it. But when your 7-year-old wife begins to act strangely, when she suddenly has plans that do not include you, when her laughter becomes synthetic and distant, when her touch feels foreign, you begin to investigate. You start to notice the details. She took late-night showers when she got home. She tilted her phone away from me, as if it had national security secrets. The name Daniel appeared on her screen more than once, which could hardly be explained as coincidence. So, I dug. I followed the breadcrumbs, and what I discovered was worse than I had imagined. Tonight marked the final nail in the coffin. I had tracked her phone, which I never thought I would do. But desperation has a way of forcing you to breach boundaries you never anticipated. It sent me straight to a house I didn't recognize in an area we had no right being there. I parked outside and watched as she came out of her car, her head swiveling like a criminal looking for cops. She was nervous and excited, the kind of energy she once had for me. And then, as if to emphasize the betrayal, Daniel, a man I had never met or heard of, unlocked the front door with a sneer and brought her inside. I must have been sitting there for an hour. 2 hours was enough time for my fury to cool, and my thoughts to sharpen into something unbreakable. Long enough for me to recognize that this moment, was the true end of our marriage. Whether she knew it or not. I drove home on autopilot. My hands remained still, my heart a quiet storm. When I walked into the house, everything appeared the same. Our wedding photos were still up on the walls. Her shoes were still at the entrance. The blanket she usually wrapped up with was draped across the couch. Everything was usual. Except, it wasn't. I headed straight to her bedroom, opened my nightstand, and removed my wedding ring. I held it for a second, rolling the cool metal between my fingers, before placing it in the center of the kitchen table. I left a message beside it. It was hardly a lengthy, dramatic letter. There will be no begging for explanations, accusations, or demands. Just one sentence. You've made your choice, now I'm making mine. And then I walked away. Out the door. Into the night. No trace, no fight, and no goodbye. But, Emily. She was not going to let things end so lightly. I did not fully disappear. Not yet. I only needed room and distance to clear my mind before the eventual fallout. So I drove. No destination. No plan. Only the buzz of the motor and the flickering streetlights stretched forever ahead. At one point, I checked my phone. Emily has said nothing. Not yet. Perhaps she was still with Daniel. Maybe she didn't notice I was gone. The thought made my stomach turn, yet there was no agony left. Only a dull, smoldering resolve. I went into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the type with buzzing neon signs and walls so thin that you could hear the guy next door coughing in his sleep. I didn't care. I threw my luggage on the floor, perched on the side of the bed, and looked at the phone on the nightstand. How long before she called? The answer arrived at 4:17 a.m. The screen began to light up. Emily. I let it ring. 5 minutes later, another call, followed by a text. Where are you now? I didn't respond. A couple more messages arrived, each becoming increasingly desperate. Jake, take this seriously. Call me. What the hell is going on? Why did you abandon your ring? This is not humorous. She never asked me whether I was all right. Not once. I leaned back against the headboard and stared at the ceiling. She wasn't panicking, because she missed me. She was terrified because I was slipping out of her grasp. I must have dozed off because the next thing I know, my phone was furiously vibrating against the nightstand. Another call, but not from Emily. It came from my best friend, Mark. Something about that made my pulse quicken. I picked Jake up. Dude, what the hell is going on? Emily just phoned me, screaming out. Of course, she did. I breathed slowly. That's correct. She stated she arrived home and you were gone. I left your ring. I left a note. She's acting like you were abducted or something. He paused. What happened? I paused. Mark and I had been friends for 15 years. He was the only person I could rely on, and right now I needed an ally. So I told him everything. Those late nights. The texts. Daniel. The house. I saw her walk inside as if she belonged there. Mark did not interrupt. He was just listening. When I finally stopped, there was a long pause, followed by a low, piercing breath. Jesus Christ, Jake. Yeah. Do you have proof? I don't need proof, I stated frankly. I witnessed it with my own eyes. More silence. Then Mark muttered something under his breath before responding. She is lying, man. Not kidding. No, actually, she's lying right now. He lowered his voice. She told me you had a fight and stormed out. She made it sound like it was just a foolish disagreement, and you were exaggerating. I laughed coldly. Of course, she did. And get this. She claims she is worried about you and doesn't know what you are thinking. That hit me unexpectedly. I sat up, grasping the phone more tightly. She didn't understand what I was thinking. That terrified her. Good. Mark cleared his throat. What is your next move? I didn't respond straight away because I was unsure. But then my phone started vibrating again. Emily sent another text. We need to talk now. She was becoming desperate. This signaled it was time. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and breathed slowly. I'm heading home, I announced. Let us see what she has to say. When I pulled into the driveway, the home was black except for one light. The kitchen. I could see Emily's shadow, pacing behind the drapes. She'd been waiting. I turned off the engine and sat there for a time, grasping the steering wheel. Not because of hesitation. I was not afraid of this confrontation. I just wanted to see if she would rush out the moment she saw my car. She didn't throw open the door, crying, begging, and spinning whatever scenario she had prepared. That alone told me all I needed to know. I got outside, discreetly closed the door, and strolled up to the home. The moment my key touched the lock, the door sprang open. Emily stood there, wearing one of my hoodies. My hoodie, as if donning garments would soften me, looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. The mascara smudges on her cheeks added a wonderful touch. You scared me, she muttered. I did not respond. I walked inside, locking eyes with her as I passed. She closed the door behind me. Her hands shook. Not from sadness, but from uncertainty. She had no idea what I knew. She wasn't sure how much damage control she needed to conduct. She folded her arms and shifted her weight. Jake, why did you leave like that? I exhaled slowly, keeping my face unreadable. Why do you believe so? Her lips parted, and for a fleeting second, I noticed it. A break in her mask. But then she grabbed the scarf and shook her head. I do not know. That is why I am asking. I tilted my head. You don't know? She motioned to the kitchen table. What about the ring? The note. Is this some type of test? Because if it is cruel. Cruel. I nearly laughed. I moved past her, over to the kitchen table, and picked up my ring. I rolled it between my fingers, just as I did before leaving. Then I gently looked up. Were you with him tonight? Silence. Emily pushed her lips into a thin line. Who? She wasn't even attempting to be persuasive. I stepped closer. Daniel. Her face did not change. Daniel from work. A dry laugh. You think I'm Jesus, Jake. Is that what this is about? I stared at her. I understand. Another weight. Longer and heavier. She was examining me, trying to see how much I genuinely knew, trying to decide if she should deny, deflect, or manipulate. She went for manipulation. Okay. She groaned and shook her head. Clearly, you've been dreaming things, so let's get down and chat like adults. You departed in the middle of the night, Jake. You did not return my calls. Do you realize how absurd this is? I let out a quick gasp, not a laugh. Something colder. Insane. Yes. She snapped. You are acting paranoid. Tracking my phone. Sneaking around. Do you hear yourself? There it was. The traditional flip the script technique. I crossed my arms. So you were not at his house tonight? She swallowed. No. You hadn't been inside for about 3 hours. Jesus, Jake. No. I stepped forward, and her breath caught. So why was your automobile parked outside? That silenced her for a brief moment. Her eyes widened. Panic ensued, but she recovered quickly. Oh, my God. Are you following me now? You did not answer the question. She threw up her hands. Unbelievable. So I can't even go to a coworker's house without you having a complete meltdown. Coworker. That word nearly made me crack. I leaned in just enough to see her flinch. Say it. Her throat bobbed. Say what? Say you didn't sleep with him. Her lips parted, but no words emerged. I waited. She breathed hard. I remained silent, and the air in the room altered. I slowly nodded and took a step back. That is what I thought. Emily breathed sharply and shook her head. This is ridiculous. You are creating something out of nothing. You are acting like someone who is jealous or insecure. I saw you enter this residence. I cut in with a calm voice. I saw him draw you inside, and I noticed how you stared at him. Everything ceased. She looked at me and breathed unevenly. I watched the fight vanish from her. She understood there was no way out of this situation. Instead of breaking down, crying, or apologizing, she simply rolled her eyes. "Oh, my God." She scoffed. "You are so dramatic." I blinked. "You know what? Fine." She threw her hands into the air. "I was there. Happy." She gave a sour laugh. "However, you are exaggerating this situation. Is something out of proportion?" My chest tightened. "You cheated on me, Emily." And she shot back, "As if you were the perfect husband." The sheer arrogance of that took the wind out of me. "Excuse me, you were never home," she snapped. "Constantly working. Always stressed. Always. God. Jake. Do you even realize how lonely I have been? So, clenching my jaw justifies screwing over another guy?" She grumbled and rubbed her temples. "It is not that straightforward. It's really that simple." I spoke through my teeth. Emily let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "So, are you going to cry about it now? Pack your bags. Ruin both of our lives with one dumb error. Mistake." She wasn't apologizing. Not even a little. Any remaining grief I felt was quickly crushed under the weight of disgust. I stared at her for a long time, taking in the stranger who stood in front of me. Then I breathed, nodded briefly, and reached inside my pocket. I took out my wedding ring and held it out between us. Then I dropped it on the floor. The sound it made hitting the wood was deafening. Emily's eyes fluttered, but she remained motionless. I turned back, got my suitcase off the couch, and approached the door. "Jake." She spoke softly, almost sweetly. I did not turn around. I unlocked the door, stepped outside, and as I closed it behind me, I could hear her murmur under her breath. "Drama queen." And with that, whatever remained of my love for her died. I stood on the porch for a few moments, listening. Nothing. There are no footsteps rushing behind me. There's no desperate plea to stay. No sudden change of heart. I had given her a chance. This is your one chance to accept responsibility. Regarding what she did. To speak the truth. To accept responsibility. She had laughed in my face. Someone humiliated me. She rolled her eyes as if I were the problem. I tightened my jaw as I stepped off the porch into the cool night air. The only sounds were the soft hum of streetlights and the distant rustling of trees. Everything is the same, even the neighborhood and the house. But nothing was the same anymore. My phone buzzed as I was walking to my car, a text from Mark. "How did it go?" I exhaled through my nose and typed, as usual. She accepted it and then blamed me. No regret. The dots appeared immediately. "You okay?" Was I? I got into the driver's seat, grasped the wheel, and looked at the house one final time. The windows had turned dark again. There is no shadow waiting at the door. No. Emily. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something close to tranquility. "Yeah." I wrote back. "I am done." It was about 5 a.m. when I arrived at Mark's apartment. He opened the door before I could knock, his countenance opaque. He said, "You look like shit." I laughed briefly and without humor. "Do you feel it too?" He stepped aside and let me enter the made-up guest rooms. "I figured you would not want to be alone tonight." I nodded and thanked him. We did not provide sentimental speeches. Never had. But I appreciated it more than I could express. "Want a beer?" he inquired, already walking to the refrigerator. I shake my head. "If I start drinking right now, I will not stop." He took one for himself and cracked it open while leaning against the countertop. "So, what is the plan?" I ran my hand down my face. "Divorce." "Good." He took a gulp of his beer before pointing the bottle at me. "Do not let her talk you out of it." I gave a dry laugh. "She will not. She might." Guilt and manipulation. Maybe even faking tears. You understand how individuals like her operate. I did. Mark had never liked Emily. Not really. He'd tolerated her for my sake. I could see it now, as clear as day. He'd always seen through her. "She won't get another chance," I replied strongly. "I do not care what she says. I am done." Mark looked at me for a second and then nodded. "Good." I leaned against the counter and stared at the tiled floor. The tiredness was now sinking into my bones, yet there was something else underneath. A question, a nagging, persistent itch in the back of my head. "She was too calm," I said. Mark lifted his eyebrow. "What?" When I faced her, I spoke slowly. "She did not panic, did not break down. She didn't try to fake her way out of it." I almost trailed off. Mark finished for me, as if she expected it. I looked up. That was it. She had not been caught off guard. There was a glimmer of shock. Yes, but it was brief. Two briefs. She had gone straight to damage control mode, as if she had previously planned what to say. It was as if she had already played out the scenario in her mind. A slow, creeping realization came over me. I was not the first to find out. Mark frowned. What do you mean? I met his gaze, my gut tightening. Someone knew about the affair before I did. Mark set his beer down. Who? I shake my head. I do not know. But what if I find out? My jaw clenched. Emily wasn't simply cheating. She had no problem cheating. That indicated she had been enabled. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind replayed every conversation and suspicious situation. I'd ignored every red flag. I'd talked myself out of seeing someone fresh, not simply new. Someone had helped her hide it, encouraged it. Maybe she felt safe enough to cheat, come home, and pretend everything was fine. And while I thought about it, one name kept coming up. Rachel. Emily's best buddy. The person who had never liked me. The one who was constantly commenting on our marriage. About how males don't value what they have until it's gone. The person who had unexpectedly become much more involved in Emily's life in recent months. Emily has used his residence as an excuse for being out late several times. I took my phone off the nightstand. It was past 10 a.m. now. My screen was inundated with Emily's texts. Jake. Can we just talk? I understand how frustrated you are, but we can work this out. You are acting like a child. Come home. Then further down. One that almost had me laughing. If you want to be petty, that is okay. But please tell me where you left your car keys. She was out here trying to dominate the narrative as if I was the problem. As if she were the victim. I ignored her and walked directly to Mark's kitchen, where he was already awake and sipping coffee at the counter. Morning, he said. You look like crap. Rachel knows. He blinked. Rachel? Emily has a pal. She learned about the affair before I did. Mark frowned. Are you sure? I nodded and rubbed my fingers across my jaw. Think about it. Rachel's name appeared on every questionable justification Emily made. If she wasn't covering for her, she was likely encouraging it. Mark gave out a slow whistle. Damn. I need to know for sure. Mark looked at me for a second before setting down his mug. So, what is the plan? I breathed sharply. I am going to make her tell me. Rachel lived in a stylish apartment complex in the city, with pricey rent and a gym that hardly anyone utilized. I had come here a few times. Holidays, birthdays, and the odd forced social gathering at which she appeared to tolerate me when I knocked. I was half expecting her not to respond. But after a few seconds, the door slid open. Rachel stood there in leggings and an oversized sweater, her hair in a sloppy bun, looking unhappy before she saw who was at her door. Her expression wavered for a second. Jake. She crossed her arms. What do you want? I leaned against the doorframe and kept my voice level. We need to talk. She scoffed. What is this about? About Emily. A pause, followed by a forced, sardonic laugh. Oh, this should be good. I did not move. Can I come inside? Rachel rolled her eyes. No, I smiled, but it wasn't warm. Okay, then we can have this conversation right here. Your neighbors may find it intriguing. Her expression clouded. What exactly are you talking about? I tilted my head. How long have you known? Rachel's face scarcely changed, but I noticed it. Her gaze shifted slightly. I have no idea what you're talking about, she replied bluntly. I paused for a second before quietly saying, Daniel. There it was. Her shoulders are tense. She quickly looked away. Rachel was not a good liar. She was arrogant enough to believe she didn't have to be. I took a slow stride forward. Did you know? She rolled her eyes. Jesus, Jake. You're acting as if Emily killed someone. I clenched my jaw. She may as well have. She ruined our marriage, and you helped her do it. Rachel crossed her arms again and shifted her weight. Want to know what I think? She smirked. I think you should stop being such a whiner about it. My hands tightened into fists, not because I intended to hit her. I would never. But I had never met someone who was so proud of being a bad person. Rachel must have noticed because she took a step back and let out a soft giggle. Oh, come on, what? You believe you were the perfect husband? Do you think Emily was destined to sit around and be miserable forever? I stared at her. So, what did you do? No. She did not even attempt to dispute it. Of course, I knew. I encouraged it. Hell, I set it up. My stomach turned. You what? Rachel shrugged. She needed to step outside of her comfort zone. You were suffocating her. I almost laughed, choking her. I work hard to offer her a wonderful life. Yeah. Rachel sneered. And in the process, you bored her. I took a steady breath, suppressing the rage swelling in my throat, and Daniel. Rachel's sneer deepened. Isn't he great? I breathed through my nose and shook my head. You're unbelievable. She tilted her head. What is your eventual goal here, Jake? Do you want to shout at me, make me feel badly? She laughed. Newsflash, I don't care. I nodded slowly. Yes, I can see it. Rachel shrugged. Emily is happier now. Perhaps you should be too. Something about it felt different since she wasn't lying. Emily was happier. She had been for some months. And now I understand why. She had already moved on. I stepped back and shook my head. You know what? I'm delighted I arrived here. Rachel lifted her eyebrow. Oh, yes. Yeah, I remarked, looking into her eyes one last time. Because now I will know who to blame if Emily loses everything. And with that, I turned to walk away. Rachel didn't call after me or stop me. But as I approached the elevator, I overheard her muttering under her breath. Pathetic. I smiled, because I knew what to do next. I didn't go back to Mark's immediately. I needed to think. I needed time to process what had just transpired. Allow your rage to simmer and transform into something constructive. Because fury would not get me what I desired. Revenge would. Rachel had given me just what I needed. Confirmation. She realized she'd always known. And she had assisted Emily in cheating. Encouraged her. Set her up with Daniel as if it were a sick game. She wasn't apologizing. Neither was Emily. They believed they had won. They assumed I'd go away humiliated. Tail between my legs. They had no idea what was coming. My strategy had begun to take shape by the time I turned into Mark's driveway. I came in, put my keys on the counter, and sat across from him at the kitchen table. That was quick, he commented, raising an eyebrow. How did it go? I exhaled. She admitted it. I'm also very smug about it. Mark's jaws constricted. Of course she was. She even said she put Emily up with Daniel as a favor. Mark murmured something beneath his breath before shaking his head. So what happens now? I leaned back and folded my arms. Divorce? He nodded. Figured. But isn't that all? A slow smirk formed on the edge of my lips. No, I replied. That is not all. Mark leaned forward. Is he interested now? What are your thoughts? I took a deep breath. Emily believes she is getting out of this clean. She thinks she can rewrite the tale and make it my fault. She is already trying. I brought out my phone to show him the texts. She's playing the victim. She is painting me as the terrible person. Mark scrolled through, shaking his head. A classic cheater. Move. He put the phone down. What exactly is going on? I met his gaze. I want her to lose everything. His lips parted slightly, as if he didn't expect me to speak it aloud. But he slowly nodded. I'm in. Step 1 was simple. Hire the best divorce lawyer in town. Emily had no idea what was coming. She still believed she had the upper hand and could influence me into remaining. Or, at the very least, leave with half of everything. But I wasn't about to let her win. Mark knew a shark in the legal profession. Someone who specialized in situations like this. His name is Greg Harper. Mark said, pulling up a contact from his phone. He's cruel. He has handled celebrity divorces and high-profile businessmen. If you want to make sure Emily walks away with nothing, he's your man. I did not hesitate. By the next morning, I was sitting in Greg Harper's office, setting out everything. Cheating, gaslighting, and lying. Greg listened intently, nodding and occasionally tapping his pen on his desk. After I finished, he sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Infidelity is difficult to prove legally, he explained. However, having evidence changes the game. I nodded. I followed her phone. I watched her enter his house. I confronted her. She confessed in front of her best buddy. Greg's eyes glittered. Good. Any texts? Emails? Photos? I picked out my phone and scrolled through the messages Emily had sent me. I also got copies of her text to Rachel, which indicated her sneaking around. Nothing directly admitting the affair, but enough to imply it. Greg grabbed my phone, scrolled through the texts, and smirked. This is more than enough to make her life miserable in court. Good, I replied. She works, correct? Yes, she is a marketing manager. Greg's sneer deepened. Then she has an income, which allows us to advocate for an unequal asset distribution. If we play it correctly, you'll walk away with more than half. I breathed slowly. Perfect. He nodded. I will dump the papers. But listen, when she is served, she will panic. She will try to guilt you, manipulate you, and perhaps even drag this out. You have to keep strong. No second chances. There will be no backing down. I met his gaze. I will not. And I intended it. Step 2 involved Daniel, Emily's affair partner, the man she had abandoned our marriage for. I hadn't learned much about him yet, but I was about to. Because if Emily expected to gallop off into the sunset with him, she was in for a surprise. I was about to damage them both. Daniel wasn't difficult to find. A quick search for his name and company. One of the few details Emily ever said provided me with what I needed. LinkedIn, Facebook, even an older Instagram account that hadn't been updated in a while. His office website, however, was the true gem. Daniel Whitmore, Senior Account Executive. His bio was full of business jargon. He was enthusiastic about brand development and dedicated to providing high-quality client experiences. The usual rubbish. The jackpot, however, is located right at the bottom. Married. Not only that, married with children. 2 small boys. The family photo buried at the bottom of his page shows his wife, a woman named Lena Whitmore, standing alongside him, smiling as if she had no knowledge her husband was screwing another man's wife. Emily had ruined my marriage. It seemed only reasonable that I return the favor. Mark wasn't convinced at first. Dude, he murmured, pacing around his kitchen. I understand the divorce stuff. I understood the want to take Emily for everything except this. He motioned to my phone, where I was viewing Lena's social media. Are you sure about this? I looked up to him. She deserves to know. Mark sighed. I mean, obviously. However, this is not simply about exposing Emily. You're devastating another woman's life. I leaned forward. So, what? Daniel is able to go away without any consequences. He gets to maintain his happy little family, and I'm left to pick up the pieces. Mark ran his hand through his hair. All right. I simply exhaled. Look, I am with you. I just want to make sure you're thinking things through. I've never been more clear about anything in my life, I said. Mark looked at me for a second and then nodded. All right. How do you want to go about this? It took less than an hour to compose the message. Hello, Lena. You don't know me, but you ought to. My name is Jake, and I have reason to suspect that your husband, Daniel, is having an affair with my wife, Emily. I have seen them together. I have proof. If you want the truth, I am willing to tell you everything. I understand how hard this is, and I apologize, but you deserve to be honest. Something neither of our spouses appears to believe in. I shared screenshots of Emily's communications with Rachel, which suggested sneaking around the text she had sent me and lying about her location. Even a fuzzy photo I took of her automobile parked outside Daniel's home. I looked at the message for a long time. Then, without further thinking, I pressed send. Lena replied after 10 minutes. Call me. She sent her phone number. I looked at Mark, who was watching from across the table. She answered. Mark exhaled. Shit. I stood. I went to the other room and phoned. Lena picked up on the first ring. Who are you? She inquired, her tone crisp and straight. Don't panic. There were no tears. Simply restrained fury. I respected it. I'm Jake, Emily's husband. Silence, then prove it. That's what I expected. I went through my camera roll, picked an old photo of Emily and myself together at a corporate event, and sent it. A prolonged pause. Then, Lena exhaled forcefully. Tell me everything. So I did. I informed her about the late nights, the lies, the moment I saw Emily enter Daniel's house. She stared at him as if she were his. Lena did not make a sound the entire time, but when I finished, her breathing changed. Shaky. How long? She finally asked. I paused. I'm not sure exactly, but for at least a few months. Another pause, followed by a quiet, lethal voice. Are you certain? Yes. A slow inhalation. Do you have proof? I glanced at my phone. I can sense some of it already. I can send more to it. I mailed everything. Screenshots and timestamps. Even a video I had taken from my car of Emily entering into Daniel's home. Lena became silent again. I could hear her breathing heavily through the phone, as if she was trying to hold something in. Then she gave a low, bitter laugh. That piece of shit, she mumbled. I waited. Then with ice-cold clarity. She claims he believes I'm out of town right now. I straightened. Are you not? No, she replied. I arrived home last night. I just did not inform him. I breathed slowly. Then you understand what to do. Lena laughed again, this time without humor. Oh, Jake, don't worry. I am going to tackle it. A pause followed by a softer tone. Thank you. I nodded. Even if she was unable to see me. Good luck. You too. The call has ended. I stood there for a second, looking at my phone. I then turned to Mark. Well, he replied, leaning back. I guess we are about to find out what hellfire looks like. And I could not wait. I barely had time to grasp what had occurred when my phone lit up again. But this time, it was not Lena. It was Emily. I focused on the screen, the name blazing like a danger sign. Mark leaned forward. Are you going to answer? I clenched my jaw. Yeah. I swept to accept, putting the phone to my ear. Before I could say anything, she started screaming. What the hell were you doing? I nearly left. Morning to you, Emily. Don't play games, Jake, she snapped. Daniel's wife just phoned me. freaking out. She knows. She knows everything. I feign astonishment. Wow. That is ridiculous. I wonder how she found out. Cut the bullshit. Emily's breathing was rapid and fierce. You told her, right? I let the silence stretch. Then, calmly, I said, yes, I did. She let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a snarl. Oh, my God. You were such a youngster. This time, I laughed deeply. Are you calling me a child? That's a lot of money for someone who gave up her marriage for a loser at work. You don't realize what you've done. She yelled. Daniel is losing his sanity. His wife is tossing him out. He says it's all my fault. I shrugged. Yes, it is. She let out a choked fury cry. No, Jake, it is your fault. You had to go and act petty. Had to end people's lives. Oh, I'm sorry. I shut off my voice abruptly. Have I ruined your nice little affair? Did I make it more difficult for you to sneak around like a cheating piece of garbage? Emily did not say anything. I could hear her breathing, uneven, furious, then softer. You don't realize what you've started. Something about the way she said it sent shivers down my spine. I frowned. What the hell does that mean? She did not answer the phone. Click dead. I snatched the phone away and stared at the screen. Mark paid close attention to me. What was that? I breathed sharply. She said, I'm not sure what I started. Mark's eyebrows furrowed. What the hell does that mean? I shake my head. I'm not sure, but I was about to find out. That afternoon, I received my answer in the shape of a knock at my door. Mark and I were going over divorce documents when it happened. The sharp, intentional bang, bang against the wood. Mark stood up and frowned. Are you expecting someone? No, I answered, already approaching the door. I swung it open, and Daniel was there, looking like he was about to slay me. I didn't react immediately. I just stood there and took him in. He appeared gruff, as if he had not slept. His face was hot, his eyes wild, and his hair untidy, as if he had spent hours raking his hands through it. I maintained my voice level. Can I help you? You've ruined my life. His voice was deathly quiet, too quiet. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, you mean how you destroyed my marriage? His jaw stiffened. You didn't need to inform Lena. I exhaled slowly, without humor. Yes, I did. His nostrils flared. You have no idea what you did. Something about how he phrased it made my muscles tighten. I moved forward. Enlighten me, then. What precisely did I do? Daniel gave a harsh laugh. You don't understand, do you? Do you think this is a game, or a revenge fantasy? You believe you are the only one capable of burning everything down. Mark was now closely eyeing me from behind. I could sense his stress building, I said. Daniel breathed sharply and glared. Emily told me everything. She paused, then told me about your employment for the first time since it all began. My stomach sank. My job. I have worked there for years. My contract has a morals clause. A contract that stated that if I violated it, or if they suspected me of unethical behavior, I would be fired immediately. Mark is tight next to me. Jake, I gulped hard. How about it? Daniel smirked. Emily is making some calls. A chilly, creeping rage settled in my chest. You have got to be kidding me. Oh, I am dead serious, Daniel said. She says you've been bothering her, following her, and making threats. My hands tightened into fists. Mark stepped in. Okay, that's enough. It is time for you to leave. Daniel did not move. His eyes remained fixed on mine. Do you want more? He said with a hushed voice. You've got it. I stared at him, my heart pumping. Then I smiled. Because if they wanted conflict, they had no idea what to expect. I said, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Daniel scoffed. We'll see about it. Then he turned to walk away. Mark let out a slow breath. Holy shit. I exhaled and wiped a palm down my face. They want to play nasty. I met Mark's gaze. My jaw spoke. Let us play filthy. I did not squander time. If Emily and Daniel were coming for me, I wasn't going to sit back and see how much damage they could cause. I was going to strike first. Mark was already on the phone before I said anything. Pacing through the living room. We must get ahead of this, he whispered. If Emily is contacting your job, you should call them first. He was correct. I grabbed my phone, scrolled to my boss's number, and dialed. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. Jake. Is everything okay? I took a breath and kept my voice cool. Controlled. Hello, Mike. I wanted to let you know about something. There was a pause. All right. I leaned against the counter, squeezing my phone more tightly. My wife and I are currently going through a divorce. It's messy. I just found out she was having an affair, and she's not handling the aftermath well. A lengthier pause this time. Then Mike sighed. Let me guess. She's calling to stir things up. Bingo, I said. I would not be shocked if you received a call today. She might mention something intriguing about me. Mike grunted. Figures. What kinds of intriguing things? I exhaled. It's probably something to do with me bothering her. Maybe you're following her, making threats. Clearly, none of this is true. But I wanted you to hear from me first. Mike murmured something beneath his breath. People are actually pulling this nonsense. He apparently remained silent for a second before exhaling. All right. If she calls, I will take it with a grain of salt. A pause. Jake, you're good at what you do. I would hate to lose you over some nonsense drama. Relief flooded my chest. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. Don't mention it, he said. And for whatever it's worth. Screw her. She sounds like a piece of work. I smirked. You have no idea. Step 1. Secure. My job is finished. Step 2. Bury Emily and Daniel in their own lies. Mark and I sat down at his kitchen table and discussed everything. I had proof of the affair. I received texts that directly contradicted what Emily was undoubtedly telling people. And I had one more ace up my sleeve. I need to go public, I stated. Mark lifted his eyebrow. Public? I nodded. Emily believes she can control the narrative, telling our friends, family, and even my job. Whatever version of events portrays me as the villain. I leaned forward. I have to make sure she doesn't get the chance. Mark frowned. You're thinking about social media. Is it too easy for her to manipulate things? No. I'm going to see our friends and relatives. I am telling them before she does. Mark gave out a slow whistle. Damn, you're really going scorched earth. I smiled, but it wasn't funny. They deserve to know the truth, and I deserve to make sure she doesn't change it. Mark nodded. Okay, let's get to work. The first call went to my parents. My mother responded on the second ring. Jake, how are you doing, sweetheart? I breathed slowly. Mom, I need to tell you something, and it is not good. The warmth in her voice vanished abruptly. What is it? So, I told her everything. The affair. The encounter. Emily tried to blame me, manipulate me, make herself the victim. My mother was silent by the time I finished. Then, in the coldest voice I'd ever heard from her, she said that. Shrew. I nearly laughed. That pretty much sums it up. She expelled a quick breath. We adored Emily. We trusted her. How could she have done this to you? Because she is selfish. I replied simply. And she figured she could get away with it. Not anymore. My mother breathed sharply. What do you need from us? Just like that, without hesitation. Full backing. I closed my eyes. Relief washed over me. Don't believe anything she says to you. She's already attempting to twist things. I need everyone to know the true story. We've got your back, baby, my mother said firmly. Please let us know if you have any needs. I will, I replied. Thank you, Mama. Call after call. I ripped off the mask. Emily tells lies. We have mutual friends. They were stunned. Some people had already heard from Emily. Her account of the story suggested that I was controlling, unstable, and paranoid. But I told them the truth, the whole story. The tide began to turn. Then came the best call of the day. Because just when I felt I had handled everything correctly, and Emily had no more surprises left, my phone rang. An unknown number. I almost didn't respond. But something prompted me to pick up. So, I did. And as soon as I heard the voice on the other end, I knew it was Lena. She sounded outraged. Jake, she replied, her voice tense with hardly contained wrath. My pulse quickened. Lena. You'll want to hear this. I sat upright. What happened? She expelled a quick breath. Daniel has also been lying to Emily. I blinked. What? You didn't simply cheat on me. She spoke, her voice shaking with wrath. He also cheated on Emily with someone else. A beat of quiet. A grin gradually grew across my face. Tell me everything. Lena did not hold back. He's been screwing another woman for months. Jake. She said, her voice raging. Not only Emily. A female from his gym. He's been mentoring a 24-year-old trainer. I gave a brief, harsh laugh. Unbelievable. Emily had destroyed our marriage for this guy. Had defended him, lied for him, and joked about me. All while assuming she was his one and only. Meanwhile, Daniel was playing the same game against her. When did you find out? I asked. Just after I kicked his ass out of the house, Lena said. I read over his correspondence. I found bookings for a hotel I'd never been to. We checked our credit card history. It turns out he's been splitting his time between Emily and his young gym rat. I breathed softly. So Emily was never special to him? No, Lena replied, her voice dark with enjoyment. She was simply another choice. I let it sink in. Emily had abandoned our marriage for a man who did not even respect her enough to remain faithful. She had rolled her eyes at me, derided me, and called me dramatic, and now she was about to taste the betrayal she had served up. Lena, I murmured hesitantly, how do you feel about putting this little grenade right on Emily? There was a gap before Lena let out a low, happy laugh. Oh, she said. I had hoped you'd say that. Emily had no idea what was coming. She'd spent the entire day scrambling, calling people, attempting to contain the damage, and portraying herself as the victim. But cheats don't expect to be cheated on. That night, Lena and I carried out the plan. It was simple, brutal, perfect. She texted Emily first. Hello. We need to chat about Daniel. Emily answered quickly and predictably. What about him? Lena kept things vague, which kept her interested. I think it's preferable if we talk in person. Emily. Like a desperate moron, she agreed quickly. Fine. Come over. And so Lena found herself standing in my former house, face to face with the woman who had destroyed my marriage. Mark and I waited in the car. The second time, Lena stepped outside. She called me, laughing so hard she could barely speak. She seemed really smug at first. She gasped between laughs. She honestly tried to console me, stating she understood my distress. I gave a dry chuckle. She honestly believed she had won. Yeah, not anymore, Lena said. The second time I told her about the other woman, she cracked. Completely lost it. I leaned forward, beaming. Tell me everything. Lena caught her breath. First, she went completely still, as if quiet. Then she began asking far too many questions. What is her name? How long has this gone on? Are you certain? So what did you say? I told her the truth. I presented her the proof. Jake. She looked like she was going to pass out. I smiled. Satisfaction washed over me. Lena let out another laugh. Then she snapped, screamed, and threw shit, insisting that Daniel would never do that to her and that I was lying. That it was a weak attempt to turn her against him. Mark murmured denial beside me. Typical. But Lena continued. I pulled out my phone and showed her the receipts, credit card purchases, emails, and hotel reservations. She simply slumped, as if everything in her tiny, illusory universe came crashing down at once. I grinned. Lena took a long breath, her voice full of joy. Then I departed, but not before telling her exactly what she told you. I frowned. What? Her tone shifted, sarcastic. You're being very theatrical. I burst into laughter. Pure, unadulterated victory. Emily had called me dramatic, laughed in my face, and gaslit me to oblivion. And now she was drowning in the very same betrayal. I did not hear from Emily that night or the next day. But on the third day, she arrived at Mark's residence. The knock was light and timid. Not like Daniel's. The first opened the door. Emily stood there looking like hell. Her eyes were red, her hair was tangled, and her usual controlled, beautiful look had been broken. For the first time since the beginning. She appeared small. Jake, she whispered. I raised an eyebrow. So you're finally interested in talking? She swallowed forcefully, her hands trembling. I did not know. I tilted my head. Didn't know what. Her lips separated. Her breath shook. About Daniel. About the other woman. I shrugged. It sucks, doesn't it? She expelled a sharp, painful breath. Jake, please. I botched it up. I raised a hand. Stop. She froze. I took a step forward and lowered my voice. I do not care. Tears filled her eyes. But nothing. Emily. I shook my head, keeping my voice cool. Final. You've made your choice. You rolled your eyes. You laughed at me. And now you want sympathy. You now desire forgiveness. She bit her lip. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I was stupid. I smirked. Yeah, you were. She flinched. I took a slow breath. My chest is light. No more agony. There is no longer anger. Just clarification. Emily, I murmured softly, you aren't special. You were only a supporting character, and now you're nothing. Her lips twitched. I breathed and stepped back. Now return home or to wherever you go when you have nothing left. And then, just like she had done to me, I closed the door in her face. Emily's world had collapsed. Her marriage has ended. Her reasonable companion. Cheating on her the whole time. Her best buddy, Rachel. Exposed as a snake. And me? I was free, no fury or regret, just peace, and it felt great.